Our Supertastic Chicken movie featuring Patricia and Francine, who donated their bodies to science. Now, starting with external anatomy, chickens have their outer earlobe, which the skin will most likely indicate the color of the shell. So this chicken's shell will most likely be white, and the comb and the wattle, little parts of skin on the top and bottom of their head, which are most likely ornamental and change based on sex hormones. And then next is their beak and mouth, which is used to help tear and shred food apart and is the first step of digestion. And their tongue is particularly small and triangular shaped. It has very few muscles and rarely any taste buds. And the uropygial gland is on their back. It is right near their tail, and chickens can be seen rubbing their head on this sebaceous gland as it secretes oils that help to waterproof the bird so that the water does not soak into their feathers. And then the brachial vein is the largest vein on the wing, and that is where blood is drawn of the chicken, and it rests between the bicep and tricep muscle. And then next, under the feathers on their wing, there are the primary feathers, which are the largest, separated by the axial feather, for the secondary feathers, which are more tightly grouped together. And then this is the digestive tract. It starts with the beak, which will tear the food apart down through the esophagus into the crop, which is where food is stored, and then into their proventriculus, which is like a stomach. It secretes hydrochloric acid and enzymes and mucus for digestion. And then it travels into the gizzard, which has thick muscular walls and a really rough inner surface, and this will grind and mash the food, even stones, to a super fine paste so that it can travel through the small intestine. And then it travels into the duodenal loop, the first part of the small intestine, which is held together by the pancreas, which secretes enzymes that's helpful for digestion. And then in the small intestine, this is where nutrient absorption occurs. And then the internal ceca contains bacterial population that's important for the digestion of plant cellulose. And then down into the large intestine, which is where water absorption occurs, and then out through the cloaca, which is where their feces will be excreted. And now it starts down the esophagus into their crop, which is where food can be seen right in this photo, then down into their proventriculus, and then into their gizzard, which as you can see is super muscular and almost looks like a heart, down into their small intestine, which is held together by their mesentery, into the large intestine, and then finally out of the cloaca. And then lastly is the gallbladder, which stores bile produced in the liver, and the gallbladder discharges bile into the duodenum and aids digestion and absorption of lipids.
So in here, we'll talk about the wing muscles. And for the wing muscles, on the left, you can see the biceps brachii, and it is at the top of the wing, and the purpose of it is to flex the wing and the elbow. Right below the biceps brachii is the triceps brachii. And for the triceps brachii, it flexes the shoulder and extends to bring the forearm forward. On the right, this is a photo from the internet, as we don't have a photo of the deltoideus muscle, and then right below is the source. So for the deltoideus muscle, it is a sheet-like muscle that covers the top of the shoulder. And this muscle flexes the shoulder and brings the wing rotating out. All right, and we'll talk about the leg and the thigh muscles. All on the left is the iliotibialis muscle, also known as the gluteus maximus. And for that, it's also a sheet-like muscle like the deltoideus, and this one covers most of the thigh. It flexes the hip, extends the knee, and the lower leg. Right below it at the bottom is the semitendinosus. For the semitendinosus, it extends the thigh. And then right next to it is a semimembranosus. For that, it also extends the thigh, but also flexes the knee. All the way at the top of the thigh is the sartorius muscle. For that, it flexes the hip and extends the knee. Tibialis muscle anterior flex the tarsometatarsus bone, which is the bone in the lower leg. It will flex that forwards. On the right, again, the sartorius at the top of the thigh. Right below it is a quadriceps femoris muscle, and that extends the thigh. Right below that muscle is the ambiens muscle. Right below the ambiens muscle is the adductor longus. The reason it's called adductor longus is because it adducts and extends the thigh. And right below it is the semimembranosus. Great. And then for the back part of the lower leg is located the gastrocnemius muscle. And that muscle flexes the knee and extends the foot. Now we'll talk about the two breast muscles. There is the major pectoralis muscle, also known as a superficial pectoral. That is the largest muscle of the chicken, and it contributes to most of the force needed for the chicken to move its wing down. And then right next to it, deep into that muscle, is the minor pectoralis muscle, also known as the supracoracoideus muscle. And that is the opposite of the major pectoralis because it elevates the wing to bring it up. There's also a system called the natural pulley system where a tendon from the minor pectoralis muscle passes along the medial surface or the near midline, the body of the coracoid bone, which is why this muscle is called the supracoracoideus muscle.
Now we're talking about the female reproductive system. And the female reproductive system consists of the ovary, the infundibulum, magnum, isthmus, uterus, shell gland, vagina, rectum, and cloaca. I will start off by talking about the ovary, which is down on the bottom right. And the ovary is located on the left side of the abdominal cavity. And it has three types of yellow follicles. So we have the large yellow follicles, which are the largest follicles, and that'll be considered F1. And then we have, those will be considered the next ones to ovulate. So those are the largest ones. Then we have our small yellow follicles, which will continue to grow and replace F1 after it ovulates. And then finally, we have our small white follicles, and those replace the small yellow follicles after they move up in the hierarchy. I will now talk about the infundibulum, which is at the top left. And the infundibulum is the part of the oviduct that catches the oocyte after ovulation and directs it towards the magnum. It is also the site of sperm storage for avian species. And the magnum, which is right below the infundibulum, is the thick-walled part of the oviduct with glands that produce and secrete albumin and other proteins for the egg. And then at the top right, we have the shell gland, and there's currently an egg inside when we were dissecting it. So the shell gland is also known as the uterus, and it is the site for shell formation and pigmentation. Also, this photo in the middle was drawn. It was not taken by Google. All right, now we'll talk about the isthmus, and we did not get a clear photo of the isthmus, so we are using this one from Google. And it is caudal to the magnum, and it is where egg membrane will be formed. And then we will talk about the stigma, which is over here, and it's this yellow line between the blood vessels. And that is the area on the follicle where it splits into the oviduct. And then the vagina, which is over here, we also did not get a clear photo of that. It is in between the shell gland and the vent, or also known as the cloaca. And then finally, we have our cloaca, which is down here, and that is the site where feces and the egg is being released.
Alrighty. Well, now we're going to move on to the male reproductive system with the urogenital system. So here, we all had hens, so we don't have any pictures of the male anatomy. So we drew a picture of it. So here we can see that they have two internal testes where the sperm is made, and then the sperm will travel down the ductus deferens, also known as the vas deferens, and then it will exit out the cloaca. Now, it's important to note that there's no seminal vesicles or prostate gland to contribute to the semen. So instead, there is a lymph gland that is associated with the reproductive tract, which will contribute to the semen and help things move swimmingly. Now, moving on to the urogenital system, it removes genus waste and waste for metabolism, and also it maintains osmotic fluid balance. Now, it's an important distinction to note that they are excreted as urates compared to other mammals, which excrete urea. Now, as we can see here, the kidneys are 3-lobed in the dorsal cavity of the abdomen. So they're located below the testicles, so closer to the spinal cord. And they have ureters that emerge from the cranial and middle lobe and run parallel to the abdominal aorta, and they are terminated in the cloaca. It's also a very important distinction to notice that there's no bladder. So there's no place for the urates to be stored in the system. All right, now moving on to the respiratory system. Their main function is similar to other animals where they have oxygen intake and carbon dioxide waste removal, and also some cooling factors in there as well. So as we can see here, they contain a trachea, a pharynx, which is their vocal cords. They have 2 lungs, which we can kind of see over here, and over here, you see the 2 lungs. They also have 9 air sacs, 2 cervical air sacs, 1 interclavicular air sac, 2 anterior thoracic air sacs, 2 posterior thoracic air sacs, which are very important to the respiratory system, and 2 abdominal air sacs. They also have some intercostal muscles that we did not get a picture of, but it's also important to note that there's no diaphragm, creating that negative pressure for the lungs to inflate. So now we're going to get into how they actually get air in their system. So air comes in through the trachea and it fills into the posterior thoracic air sac on the first inhalation. And on the second inhalation, the air from the posterior sac empties into the lungs. That's on the exhalation. On the second inhalation, the air from the lungs empty and fill into the anterior thoracic air sac. And on the second exhalation, the air from the anterior thoracic air sac empties out back into the trachea and out of the chicken. Alrighty. Now, finally, onto the circulatory system. The circulatory system is similar to other animals, with having a 4-chambered heart containing the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. And it's also enclosed in a pericardial sac. As you can see, we have some pictures over here, and we also have a drawn picture in the middle. One important distinction is that the aortic arch reflects to the right in birds, and in other animals, it reflects to the left. So it's important to remember that the aorta goes to the right in birds. And that covers the chicken. Yeah.